Um, nice to see you all here. Welcome to this event, Curating with Matters of Security, Safety and Care.
Sorry, 1 minute. Actually, it seems like we need our videos pinned. Can tech people help us? There we go. We can do it ourselves. Excellent.
Okay, great. Again, so nice to see you all. My name is Jussi Koitela. I'm a head of program at Frame, and here with me is Yvonne Billimore, associate curator at Frame. And first we will do,
I think we'll do a practice where we just situate ourselves and do a descriptive practice. So my name's Yvonne. I have a shoulder length brown hair and I'm wearing glasses, red lipstick, and behind us is a backdrop of several books, of which you can see our newly published, just launched yesterday, Rehearsing Hospitalities Companion 3. And Jussi, do you want to do some description?
I have round glasses, quite short brown hair, white skin, and black t-shirt with me. Yes. Really pleasure to have you all here. So this event, Curating with Matters of Security, Safety and Care, is part of the Catering for Rehearsing Hospitalities Autumn 2019 program, which runs online and on-site from 8th of September till 11th of September. And it's part of the Rehearsing Hospitalities Frames public program from 2019 until 23. Rehearsing Hospitalities connects artists, curators, and other practitioners in the field of contemporary art and beyond to build and mediate new practices and engagement with diverse hospitalities. This year, program bridges hospitality and access with matters of security and safety. It's co-organized by Frame, Finnish Museum of Architecture, and Vantaa Art Museum. And it's also produced in collaboration with additional partners from Finnish Culture Institute in New York and IHME Helsinki Art Institution Organization. And Yvonne.
Yes, once again, thank you everybody for joining us today. Really nice to have so many people interested in this event and participating and gathering with us online. I'm just going to read out some information about how the event's going to run, some practicalities and things, but also just a little bit about what we're going to do today. So this online event stems from a series of short notations which feature in the Rehearsing Hospitalities Companion 3 publication, which we just launched yesterday. And hopefully some of you have already received some copies, and we can post a link to that into the chat box for the PDF version. Risha, if you could do that, that would be helpful, thanks. So yes, and this event brings together curators Yolande Zola Zoli, Heide, Yates Norton, Elena Sorokina and Rosario Talevi, with their quite different approaches and experiences for an informal roundtable discussion. And about our companion publications, we've been describing these as a place to meet with others around our existing lines of inquiry, to think with the publication as a place to gather and to host different perspectives and experiences on hospitality otherwise. And by this, I mean that we're interested in untangling some of the more complex and nuanced aspects of hospitality and considering how it can be and is already being practiced diversely and differently. And so in Rehearsing Hospitalities Companion 3, we've made a special effort to configure how some contributions could shapeshift into live readings, performances, or prompts for conversations. And during this, well, particularly during this edition of Gathering for Rehearsing Hospitalities, which Jussi mentioned, launched yesterday on 8th and runs until Saturday 11th. And so last night we had readings and live performances in connection to the publication, and this event today is another example of this sort of publication program interaction. And back to the speakers today, using this prompt of should we become more hospitable and caring towards matters of security and safety, and also how might we deal with the weight of this accountability and responsibility in our artistic and curatorial practices. We invited the speakers that are here with us now to write short notations in response to this provocation. And we asked them how concepts and practices of hospitality, security, safety, and care shape their work and how they can be nurtured within a curatorial practice. And so their texts in the publication discuss a range of curatorial practices, from architectural and social practices to working with museums and exhibitions, opening up methodologies and projects and thinking and doing. And so these all form the ground for this event today, where we're very excited to have the contributors to further expand on the questions and practices and their reflections, as well as respond to one another through this collective discussion format. And in the first part, we have the pleasure of listening to the speakers read aloud their notations. Following this, we have a short break, and then we come back together for an informal round table. And then we have another short break before opening up for questions and comments. And Rishab, if you could copy into the side chat for me just now, excellent, thank you. You've just copied in this timeline so everybody kind of knows what's happening when. And yes, we really welcome comments and questions throughout the event, and we can collate them and bring them to address at the end. So please feel free to enjoy this possibility for sort of simultaneous dialogue happening in the chat. And yes, in all of our events, Frame uses guidelines for safer and more inclusive participation. And so these are shared with the speakers in advance and are now just going to be posted into the chat box as well. And then, yes, maybe Jussi, I think you were going to mention these further technicalities.
Yes, just a second.
We are towards the end. But
yes. So this event is recorded and it stays on, and it's streamed to YouTube at the same time, and it stays at the Frame YouTube channel after this. We have Eiri Välikangas and doing captioning, and sorry, just realized that one other person who's doing captioning has changed, so I forgot person's name, but we'll post also the person's name in the chat soon. And then we have also Anse Pratus and Reishab Keili at behind the scenes managing the technical setting and doing the stream. Yes. I think we could start with Rosario doing the reading. Rosario Talevi is Berlin-based architect, curator, editor, and educator interested in critical spatial practice, transformative pedagogies, feminist futures. She is a co-director of Floating University research curator for Making Futures Bauhaus Plus and founding member of Soft Agency. She is currently holds a postdoc professor of social design at Högskola för Bildende Kunster in Hamburg. Rosario, stage is yours. You have to turn, your mic is not on.
Oh, we keep on practicing this and I never get it totally right. I was thanking you for having me today here, to both of you, Yvonne and Jussi, and hello everyone on the other side of the screen. I will start reading my statement or my notation. I have to say that this notation, just to give a little bit of a context to this text that is titled Dimensions of Care, it was something that came I was invited to a round panel in, I think it was October 2019 by Elke Krasny, was doing a symposium at the Schwules Museum in Berlin, at the Gay Museum in Berlin. And she called for a roundtable for curating care. And at that time, that was before the pandemic and before care came into the front lines of every cultural institution. I brought this as an idea to this table, and then I kept on developing, and finally I wrote a text 2 years later for a book where Jussi and Yvonne also contribute, the Making Futures book, which I think it was after these two years of care intensive or intensive care happenings, I guess, in our worlds. Yeah, so I just read. It's I start with a quote from John Tronto, also from a project where we invited her and 8 different practitioners to write to John Tronto a letter, and then John Tronto replied to each of them. You can find this online. Maybe we can post it in the chat because it's a really nice collection. So John writes in one of the letters, how do we begin to make sense of the range of care needs and burdens, of responsibilities that are unrecognized and unassumed, or the breadth and depth of care concerns across time and space? This is not an easy task. And then replying to Patricia Reed on her letter, she also says, actually, Patricia, all of the dimensions of care have to be at the right scale. They were discussing the dimensions of care and the scale of care as well. So bringing care into pedagogical experiments, learning environments, and public programming requires curatorial work that is attentive, responsible, competent, and responsive. These are the 4 ethical elements John Tronto first proposed in her seminar work, An Ethics of Care, to which she would later add plurality, communication, trust, and respect. Incorporating these qualities into the making of alternative schools, independent festivals, mobile workshops is not an easy task. This text suggests how to do so. A first step is to acknowledge the different dimensions of care that constitute projects such as Making Futures. That's a reference to one of the for the book I was writing, and making a connection to the project itself, but that's not important. And I try to, so I now went off script from the training, I go back. So these dimensions are spatial, temporal, discursive, interpersonal, organizational, and bureaucratic. And they can continue to be developed. No, at the end of the text, we could expand to ecological, pedagogical, affective, and so on. through curating about, of, in, for, with care, we ought to bring many of the invisible acts behind the scenes of cultural and knowledge production to the forefront. This, again, it's a shortening. The original text suggests practices as well and readings of how to do that, because I think in the how there is, or I give a lot of importance in how we do things, not only the what. But for the sake of shortness, I think I just, in the book, in the Rehearsing Hospitalities, we left it to the explanations of the dimensions, which I will read now. And it says, 1, spatial. Space should be designed to enable multiple uses beyond the prescribed established purpose. 2, temporal. Process-driven practices take time. Time is a valuable resource, and as such, how we spend it should be carefully designed. Make time for conversations to happen, make time for relationships to grow, make time for thoughts to be digested, make time for learnings to be incorporated. The third dimension is discursive, and I ask, what kind of discourses do we make space for? Are we aware of their implications? When we invite people into conversation, who do we validate? Who do we forget? Amplifying quiet or less heard voices should be a priority. Supporting different kinds of knowledge is a prime concern. The fourth dimension is interpersonal. And I argue that when bringing people together to work towards a collective endeavor, one should be aware of creating roles that are dynamic, to design procedures that encourage shared responsibilities and stimulate shifting hierarchies within a group. The fifth dimension is organizational, and ethics of care should be incorporated into the everyday work environment. Work conditions should be fair, and the careful distribution of resources and budget should be open and transparent. Planning the process is as fundamental as delivering the event. Organizing is a form of labor. The sixth and last dimension that I expand in this notation is the bureaucratic. And I ask, how can we bridge the separation of one kind of work and worker, the administrative, bureaucratic, from another, the creative or the academic? And it is fundamental to understand these are two interconnected parts of every cultural endeavor. The list of dimensions could expand to include, for example, ecological, pedagogical, effective, and an extended, I've already mentioned this. I think I finish here. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're still technical glitching.
Hello.
Thanks, Rosario. Really nice to hear you read this, and it's nice that you mentioned that this is part of a longer text. It was actually really difficult to try to be strict with ourselves and include the shorter version in the publication, because this practice of doing and how you offer different references and citations and readings alongside this text is really interesting. So we definitely recommend that people check out the full text as well. We had this idea that we would have some short kind of responses between, but maybe we might just move on to Yolande's reading, and we'll just kind of come back. So yes, welcome Yolande. So Yolande Zola Zoli van der Heide is exhibitions curator at the Van Appa Museum in the Netherlands. Previously, she was deputy director at Casco Art Institute, working for the Commons. Her interests lie in intersecting perspectives and modes that decenter the oppressor and practices of freedom and liberation to influence art institutional practices. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you to Yvonne and to Jussi for organizing us this afternoon. Thanks everybody for coming. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, great, thank you. What I thought to do is to maybe accompany a film work by Ana Mendieta, who's American-Cuban artist that I'll be talking about this afternoon. So I thought to play one of her works entitled Alma, Silueta and Fuego, whilst I read my notation. So I will share my screen. And the film is short, it's about 4 minutes, and it's silent. Okay. So my notation is entitled The House Always Wins, hosting Ana Mendieta in the Van Obbe Museum collection, a rehearsal for inclusion. A challenge in working with a modern art collection is dealing with its exclusions. In this tricky space of inclusion or insertion, following Karen Ann Salt, who's a scholar who specializes in issues of race and power, the work is about pushing past representation, making something present does not transform the institution around it. The task is then bound by the need for, and the paradox of, interrogating the terms of inclusion as determined by the institution. The challenge is also, of course, how to resist allowing insertion, or just the act of adding to stand in for the hard work of dismantling systems of oppression. And that's Salt again. So I've been coming to terms with this double bind in working on my first collection exhibition at Van Obbe Museum. I've been there for about 1.5 years now, particularly concerning the work of American-Cuban artist Ana Mendieta. And this is as we're in conversation about acquiring a piece of work of Ana Mendieta to enter the museum collection. A Lasting Truth is Change is the exhibition aspirational titled, and I've landed on this to consider change as a central condition, a motif and possibility for both artworks and the museum itself. More personally, the exhibition is a way for me to contend with the violence of a Western modern and contemporary art collection, as well as its archive and what it means to be included and implicated in this house of modern art. So the issue quickly reveals itself in some basic statistics from our we have a collection of around 3,000 works in our collection, with a little more than 125 women or women identifying artists, and fewer than a dozen work by Black artists that I've tallied so far. And this is all in a time when more than ever institutions, of course, are being called upon to transform and reflect a more democratic and just way of life. And this is all in a time when we need our institutions to rise up as, at their best, I suppose, custodians of radical imagination. Art, after all, is where imagination can be elaborated. It's art that makes us feel what we don't necessarily yet understand, which is a quote that I return to by Angela Davis when I'm feeling less optimistic. The bind complicates curves and kinks to resist the institution that is looking to include when we work this proposition into practice. The proposition being that, art can be the space that holds imagination or elaborate it and help us understand things that we don't fully know how to imagine. Ana Mendieta was born in Havana in 1948, and following uprisings in Cuba was exiled to the United States in 1961. She and her sister was sent there by her family, where she said to eventually have felt a sense of displacement and alienation, which is felt across her landscape inquiries, particularly her Silueta series, the film's ending now, which is around 200 earth body works in which she inscribed the landscape with her body by burning, which we've just witnessed, carving and molding her silhouette into the geography of Iowa, when she was exiled. It was first to Iowa in the US, where she went to a school for wayward children, you might say, and Mexico. These are acts of return to the earth womb, the motherland, or to be in communion with the earth. Her work has often been described like in these terms as well, in negotiating the private or the personal in relation to the earth. How do we apply this condition in an exhibition then, in an archive or collection too, I would ask, which is a question for me, how to remain faithful to this intention of hers. The art critic Lucy Lippard cites that Mendieta was overlooked for much of her practice within the land art movement, noting that despite her significant contributions, conventional criticism held that men made earth art and women made body art, or at best, earth body art. This act of retrofitting or retrospective correcting is further complicated by Mendieta's popularized, and maybe to the detriment of her oeuvre, to her popularized relation to Carl Andre, who allegedly threw her out of the window, ending her life prematurely at the age of 36. If the body is more a set of relations rather than an entity, and there I'm drawing from Judith Butler, we could consider that what it means to think about whether Mendieta rather valued her relation to the earth more than to other bodies. And what I'm trying to say is that a condition for reading her work necessitates, arguably, that there be an earth body lens as opposed to one restricted to relations to other bodies. And this would ask us to consider how we related to her alleged abuser, and perhaps even my own false sense of allyship. Mendieta's famously insisted that she prefers to work alone. There's a quote of her saying, "I need privacy because I claim territory," somewhat like a dog pissing on the ground. So then my questions in relating to her become, well, at the time of writing this at least, how can I avoid the trap of including her by having her join the incomplete house of 125? What does it mean to bring Mendieta into an incomplete house? I'm talking about the museum, and put her in dialogue with her alleged abuser post-mortem. And then there's obviously a question about how institutions can reduce harm in this respect. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe Yolande, you have to stop sharing your screen. Thank you for that. That's so nice. Like, also to hear you read this. I love this possibility to listen to people read their work aloud. So, and I think there's a lot to unpack there. So, I was very interested in this example that you used to talk through these questions, and I think we'll come back to this much more.
Yeah.
So will we move over to Yates now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Let's take some. Yeah, let's go through the first of all of this.
Let's do that. So I think you say it's your intro. We're doing turn by turn introductions.
Yeah. So I just pin Yates also so we can see it at the same time. Yates Norton is curator at Roberts Institute of Art, London. Previously, he was a curator at Rupert, Vilnius, latterly directing its 2020 public programs on care and interdependence, and co-developing the program for Creative Europe-funded consortium Who Cares. With David Rubin, he has presented on their disability justice work in the arts and educational settings. He performs and collaborates with artists including singing in Lina Lapelute, Päivä Granute, and Rukile. I cannot pronounce these names, sorry. Yes, you can do it a bit later. In the Sun and Sea Marina work, this performative work. Yes, maybe you can do the pronouncing.
Well, I think it's Bajekaite is how you pronounce it. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say welcome, and
Yeah.
I purposely I would not be able to pronounce that either. I'm afraid my pronunciation is the worst. But welcome, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much both for inviting me. I'm, as an image description, I'm a white man with blonde brown hair, and I'm sitting in a room with a dark blue curtain, a big window, and there are some pictures on the wall behind me. I'm very grateful to be part of this and to be in such good company. It's really nice to see Yolande on the screen as well, because I have Yolande to thank in a lot of my thinking, because we met last year in Italy and we had lots of chats about the sorts of things that we're talking about here. Originally, I was going to do this text with my friend David Rubain, and although I wrote it, a lot of the ideas are they're both of our voices. So essentially in this text. So like everything we write, it's always a mix of different influences and ideas. I actually changed everything I wrote. So on the 19th of July, 2021, and you'll see why I changed it when I read it. So it starts with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. from a 1967 speech called Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual doom. I am fortunate enough that I have been relatively secure, safe, and cared for, such that as of today, I have not died or suffered from the COVID-19 virus. Also on this day, that was the 19th of July, 2021, the UK government, which is my government, has lifted almost all pandemic restrictions, including social distancing and mask wearing, in spite of overwhelming advice against this. The decision raises issues about what security, safety, and care can mean. We would all like to feel safe, cared for, and secure, especially in times like this. But how can we root safety, care, and security in the intimacy and profound connection of ever-expanding forms of relationality, responsibility, and accountability, and not in the bureaucracy of risk management or the divisions wrought by oppression and prejudice, e.g., for example, who is secured and made safe from whom and why? If we are to cultivate responsible, and I use that phrase response-able from Karen Barad, which this idea of being able to respond to something or a situation. If we are to cultivate responsible practices of care, security, and safety, then they can only ever be returned to and rehearsed, to use the key words of this program, Rehearsing Hospitalities, in different configurations over time. Drawing on what Mia Mingus has said of accessibility, care, safety, said of accessibility, care, safety, and security can only ever be worked at and never fully worked out as relational, ongoing, intimate, and rooted in deep listening and commitment. And if you want to read more about Mia Mingus, there's Access Intimacy on their blog, Leaving Evidence. If not, care will likely be exploitative, security violent, and safety divisive. For me and my close friend, David Rubain, who I mentioned at the beginning, with whom my life and curatorial practice is rooted, we hold on to what profound intimacy and connection can offer in terms of liberatory work, particularly through the prism of disability justice. Such intimacy and connection make liberatory work pleasurable, joyful, and creative. And it is by centering the joy and pleasure in the very deep sense of those words, of collective creative justice work, that we can create liberatory forms of security, safety, and care. Sometimes joy and pleasure are forgotten or even actively discouraged, particularly when the so-called creative sector is hardly a secure or even safe place to work, both in terms of employment, i.e. contracts and remuneration, and in terms of prejudicial and divisive attitudes and assumptions that emerge from the increasing predominance of privilege and entitlement that characterize it. But we can learn from those whose lives are rooted in imagining and creating a space of mutual flourishing through practices that are full of failures and wayward paths, activists, artists and dreamers. And I'd agree with Yolande that imagination is what that we can hold on to when we're feeling hopeless. But resistance work can be a joyful arena of creativity, wonder, and curiosity, and not, or rather not just an exhausting struggle. Liberatory justice is about nourishing the spirit, to draw on Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote, where spirit, etymologically related to breath, is concerned with both life and inspiration, breathing in and breathing out together to learn more about one another. What we've learned over this year, and belatedly for many of us, is that we have to think carefully and responsibly about who and what can breathe and what air it is that we breathe in and out. Consequently, care, safety, and security must not be about holding down, securing with force, but holding out with humility what might be otherwise. This is something that we can try to figure out by cultivating responsible attention to our complex interdependencies, our entangled breaths. Collective joy and pleasure can be destabilizing. They unsettle our attitudes and assumptions and habits, expose our internalized oppression, so internalized in brackets. In one sense, they make us feel, quote unquote, insecure and quote unquote unsafe. But safety and security cannot be about creating barriers to the shattering pleasure of curiosity and not knowing. It is only by being unsettled and opened out that we can build worlds that are truly careful, secure, and safe for all things, a dream we must safeguard. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Yates. So much potential hope there and spirit. It's refreshing. It's nice to hear these words. Thank you for bringing them to the publication and to this event.
Thanks very much.
Okay, so maybe we'll go over to Nataša. So, oh, sorry, Elena. Oh, yes, because I'm thinking. I'm afraid that, hold on, let's just check Elena's here and video and sound working okay, because we were having some technical problems before.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, great. But
you have to start the video because I cannot start the video.
Okay. I'll just introduce you then. So sorry. So welcome, Elena, who is one half of Initiative for Practices and Visions of Radical Care with Nataša Petrešin-Bachelez. And yes, so Initiative of Practices of Care was first born during the COVID-19 lockdown in France and brings together curatorial, artistic and health research and practice to enact solidarity and care. And for them, care is explicitly tied to solidarity and framed as an intersection of social, anti-racist and ecological movements, which articulate their positions as protectors rather than protesters, emphasising the importance of caring for and being good stewards of societies as ecosystems. And Nataša was going to join us today, but is not available, unfortunately. However, because I think Nataša is running a quite intensive 4-day program or something as well. Is that right, Elena?
Yes.
Yes. So, but we're very delighted to have you here with us. And I think, should we start playing this video, this slide?
Right, yes. And then if you enable my video, then
yes.
that would be also nice.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
Now
and your sound is working much better now, so that's good. Yes, please do start whenever you're ready.
So it is a very small initiative. This is what I wanted to start with, and the size, the scale of this initiative. And this is what actually Rosario spoke about, and I like this quote quite a lot. That of all the dimensions of care have to be at the right scale. And we gave it quite a thought, actually, about the scale of our action, let's put it this way. As already mentioned, the initiative was founded during the first COVID-related lockdown in April 2020 by Nataša Petrešin-Bachelez and myself. We started to bring together curatorial, artistic, and health research and practices. Today, the initiative counts some 20 members who are artists, curators, refugees, asylum seekers, psychologists, horticultural therapists, among others. And what we have created so far is, I would say, a situation rather than an institution. It is organic, and I would say that what constitutes the initiative are really personal bonds of sympathy, empathy, and mutual support of its members. How did we come there? During the lockdown, we observed some sort of paralysis of many art institutions who just put their content online. So we asked ourselves what we could do very concretely and on our small scale. We were inspired by this writing, by the words of Eliseo Macamo, who wrote at the very beginning of the pandemic, COVID-19 is a cruel reminder that the crisis is us. As we brace up to look the pandemic in the eye, we would be well advised not to forget that our normal is, what our normal is, namely crisis. History has taught us that you do not master a crisis by setting the return to normality as your goal. You master a crisis by enabling yourself to act whatever the circumstances. So we asked ourselves what we could do, how we could act, with our skills, our knowledge, and what we could do with art. It's quite difficult to describe the curatorial skills and scope of action. So, and what we could do with art. How can we transform these skills into care? And we started to look for practices turned towards others, caring for others. Because as we know, the caretakers sometimes need care the most. And very often the institutions don't care for them, because these type of projects are not easily sellable, they are not easily exhibitable, and yet we believed they are at the very forefront of the so-called radical imagination everybody expects from art. So from the very beginning, we took some strategic decisions. We decided to stay small, local, concrete, practice-based, and to take the situation with care. We also decided to suspend the self-theorization for a while. We didn't write on care, on how care is essential, and how our systems conceal and devalue the labor of care, the invisibility of care work, and the new visibility of care through pandemic. We focused on practice. And how do we practice during COVID? How to combine care with safety and security? But also how to keep it joyful. So all that had to be invented. Strangely enough, or logically so, at some point, our tiny initiative of care started to hit the big fundamental questions. For example, what is art and what isn't? And what can art do? What can art do for Ismail, who is asylum seeker in France and who spent 6 years waiting for his refugee status? What can art do for Magdi, who fled the massacres in Darfur when he was 13 and then spent 10 years walking up Africa before he arrived in France? But also, what can art do for Barbara Manzetti, an amazing dancer and choreographer who has been developing her project Rester étranger in one of the poorest and the most violent suburbs of Paris, Seine-Saint-Denis. In English, Rester étranger could be translated stay strangers. It is my translation, and translations are tricky, as we know. Her project is a house, her own house, the house where she lives and where she receives those who need a place. This is a true architecture of radical care, physical, mental, and artistic. It embodies art in the most gentle, brilliant, and meaningful way. And Barbara struggles to get support. How can we help? Or what can art do for Katitu Tayasu, who is a shaman, healer, magician of sound, ethnographer, and who is invisibilized by the system? Why these artists don't get enough support? Barbara still struggles to get support because what she does is considered more in the frame of care and therapy than art in the eyes of many institutions. And Katitu Tayasu is invisibilized because her practice, as brilliant and breathtaking as it might be, still doesn't contain enough of what institutions identify as art. So how do we inscribe them, as Yolande asks, into institutional collections and their history, and what does it entail? So we try to invent new tools of care and support for all these different artists. And we are lucky enough to have some means and connections and networks, because Nataša, as you probably know, is the director of the public programs at Cité des Arts. I have worked as artistic director of HISC, and I continue to work for different institutions. So my most recent exhibition took place at the Para Museum, and I insisted to invite Kati Tutayasu to contribute to the catalog. It was her first big institutional publication. So for the time being, we're in the middle of this process. We have done quite a lot considering the situation, and we continue. Our next project or action will take place at the Barbara's House, Maison Restée Étranger, mid-October. Thank you.
Thank you a lot.
Yeah, thanks. There's so many rich examples in there, and it's really nice to have these images as well. You'll see in the publication that Elena and Nataša have included quite many images to accompany their contribution. Okay, so I think actually we're going to have a short break now before we build up some momentum for a bit more of an organic conversation. And yes, quite good on time. So yes, let's come back at 10 past. And as always, we wish we could make you cups of tea and serve you drinks in this interim, but I'm afraid everybody has to make their own and take a breather. And yes, we'll see you all in 10 minutes when we start back again. videos, and then we're gonna pin these as a kind of what do you call it?
Like a gallery view.
A gallery view. That. Okay. Excellent. Nice. Nice to see you all together. Okay, and so I guess we thought that we could try to enter a little bit of an organic free-form conversation and respond a little bit to each other's sorry, bit of feedback. Yeah, respond a little bit to the readings and the text, and also open these up a little bit more, because of course we are we have invited you all to participate in this discussion and also contribute to the publication, because you're all quite deeply invested in these practices of care in your work, and so there's a lot to unpack and talk about. But we wondered if maybe to start with, I could just maybe ask a question, to a kind of general question that sort of roots it back in the publication before we expand into different directions. And so I just wanted to share with audiences as well that there's, in the publication, it's really centered on this idea that security and safety and care, like hospitality, operate on these kind of both structural and intimate levels. And so we've been asking all the contributors of the publication to really consider where this relationship between the structural and the body. And I think this is something that you each have also sort of woven into these many questions that we sent as part of this provocation to you. But I just wondered if each of you maybe wanted to speak a little bit more to this relationship between the structural and the body in regards to matters of care and security and safety. And maybe I'll just, unless somebody wants to go first, will I just, Rosario.
We continue the running order. I think I can speak to that a little bit from a practical point perspective, and to bring in, I didn't prepare any images because I'm in the middle of a festival right now, and we're in the middle. We have 4 more days to go, and it's been a little bit crazy. But I would like to, for the festival I'm currently curating with Gili Karjewski at the Floating University is called Climate Care. And it's a festival that wants to, let's say, explore all of these scales, no? That you meant from the structural to the body, or I would say the planetary to like the micro and the macro, no? And like how can we, let's say, practice care in, or at least try to practice care or to feel this care in these different scales. And for practical reasons, we then, what we try to do is to invite different artists and scientists to bring a program that allows to do that. And very practical terms, this means, for example, doing a workshop that investigates the different components of the site we are located in, which is a rainwater retention basin. So it's a public infrastructure that holds and diverts water from the city. And in there is a like all these different components, let's say, that make this site. And through the festival, we explore them. And this means from inviting a scientist to explore with kids the algae that are there and try to, let's say, relate, ourselves to these other entities, or having everyday reading circles and read about different things that relate to the program. And the program also connects this idea of the climate emergency with practices of and theories and of care. But we also do sleeping workshops, and we have a 24-hour sleepover on site to dream together and reclaim dream space as a political space. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just describing the festival in practical terms, because I think bridging these different scales or the different, it's quite, sometimes it's quite abstract. So I think through embodied practices, through it's a way of like or our intent into trying to bridge these realms of theory and practice, and try to make space for this complexity in a way.
I would say that all our practices and our entire practices embodied, because what we wanted to avoid precisely is this kind of discursive grandeur, which also hit off quite a lot with the beginning of the pandemic. So all these discussions on the crisis, global crisis, the change, and so on and so forth. So that's why I like so much the Rosario's introduction, the quote on scale. So in a sense, we felt that it was producing this completely useless kind of discourse, and we wanted really to stay away from that. So we wanted to be as small, as concrete as possible. So, and as embodied as possible. That was our approach.
Maybe I think my contribution was a little bit different, because I wasn't really thinking specifically about the institutions I'm working in or have worked in, but I think to think a little bit about hope. I think it's really important to center the scale of the intimate and the interpersonal, because I think when we think of scale as something, when we think of these large scale things and massive systems and structures, and also when we think of oppression with a kind of big O, without recognizing how oppression plays itself out in a million different traumas for people all around the world, and it does, I think we can then put attention on how it affects our relationships with each other, and how our relationship to the environment around us. And I think, what all the other contributors have said, and also in this book that you've published, I think a recurring idea is attention and taking note, and being careful in the sense of developing that capacity and holding on to that capacity to be attentive, so that you don't just kind of bulldoze your way through the world, and also that you because when you're not attentive both to others and to yourself, you can play out your attitudes and assumptions in ways that can be incredibly divisive or violent and harmful. So I think, the reason why I was going to write this text for David originally, but it's part of just what we do all the time, is that a lot of our thinking, and I say our rather than mine, because I think all our thinking is kind of interdependently created. This all came out of the bond of a relationship, which I think that, you know, something that we've talked about is that the closer you get to someone, the more intimate you get with someone. When the scale gets kind of smaller and closer, it does get more complicated. But actually that complexity is something that can be, is something that is extremely nourishing. And I think sometimes we fear complexity and contradiction. And I think that's something that we need to hold on to in terms of any kind of liberatory work, is to build those strong, intimate connections with people, and then to hold and to stay with people when it gets more and more complicated, as it inevitably will be with the closer you get to someone.
To your question, Yvonne, I guess I would add that, you know, thinking about care from structural to, if the scope is from structural to the body, why Ana Mendieta, or what thinking about her work and thinking through her work has been teaching me is precisely her defiance. I'm quite interested in. So how to honor her defiance as she enters a collection, by which I mean that there's so much description about her that speaks about how she valued her position as artist beyond biography, beyond her biography as a woman, a sister, American identity, or over Cuban identity, and so on and so forth. And what she holds and values, I'm learning even above that, is the relation to the earth, to be in communion with the earth. And then, but this act of historicizing an artist, of bringing them into collection, can, in retrospect, put emphasis actually on biography and on relation with her legacy, or with other bodies. So I'm curious, insofar it's possible to honor the way that she can exist defiantly in a collection, particularly because collections by nature are violent. So that's the kind of like macro to micro or bodily scale that her work has been affording me to think through. And maybe to go back, I really appreciated the way that today was also programmed from like a proposition or provocation to precisely the practical, and emphasizing practice with Elena's presentation at the end. And if I may, I had a question for Elena, which I think you began to answer. So I appreciated this distinction that you made between situation over institution. And I jotted some of it down, like the distinction being like precisely emphasis in keeping small and local, concrete, and like suspending self-theorization and centering practice and joy. I wondered if you could, if you are able, or if you would like to, elaborate on the process around that, like how you arrived to this rubric or matrix. And then I suppose it's a double-barrel question. If I understood you correctly at the end, you said that there was desire to inscribe some of the practices that are happening within the initiative, or related back to more formal institutional forms. At least that's what I heard. And if that's the case, I wondered if you could elaborate on why.
Yes, Yolande, thank you for this question. Indeed, it would add actually some clarity to our method, if I may. We both have well, let's say our own practices, which have been developing for many years, Nataša and myself. And we have been both in and out of institutions. So we know institutions from within. We worked for big institutions. We worked for small institutions. So, and also we have a personal friendship. So that was a starting point, actually, of this situation. This is what allowed us to be quite fast to react, because we agreed on everything. So there was nothing to explain. So it was very quick. And in the beginning, the word of like the care was not part of the title. So the initial title was how do we help? The initial title was staying home. Staying home. The what does it imply actually? So what does it imply? And of course we could stay home, but then what became visible, of course, that all the essential workers were taking metro. You know, they couldn't stay home because they had to continue to work. And we started to think about this, and we started to think about something really concrete and something feasible, and also something which can be kind of, let's say, put forward, explained to artists in a way which doesn't need a huge sort of like amount of theories. Because how do you invite artists? You know, we said, you know what, we are looking for practices which look to the others. So which look to others, you know, trying to help the others, not art themselves, you know, some kind of self-reflexive practices. They are good, you know, but this is not what we're willing to support right now, because right now we saw that this type of practices will be the first one somehow to disappear or to be withdrawn support, because they're the most difficult one, the most complex, as Yates noticed and brought forward, because it is about complexities very often, this type of practices, because once you enter, you know, into dealing with other people who are the others or considered the others by the system or by the country you live in, so it becomes very complex. So, and we started to look for these practices, to invite people, and that was our first micro scale. But then, and I come to the second part of your question. So, and also kind of, this is why I was interested in Rosario's, how Rosario conceives and deals with the space. How to put it into space, because, you know, we were confined, we were in confinement, so we couldn't go out because the French confinement was extremely well disciplined. So we could only go out for 1 hour, and that was it. And we wanted also to stay analog. That was very important, because, you know, all the institutions, they started to put all their content online. And we wanted to stay analog. So how to do that? And we started to invent. Our first project was entitled No Straight Line, and you saw some images. So we invited artists to draw a segment of line, maximum 1 kilometer. So whenever they would walk during their legally permitted walk, they could draw a section of line. A segment of line. So, and the spaces we used were available spaces and outdoor spaces, because for obvious reasons we couldn't meet indoors. But for every situation, let's say, we tried to come up with some kind of curatorial kind of added value. It's not that we said, okay, let's meet up and hang out. No. So we started to say, okay, our office is now this cedar tree. So this is our office. We meet there, we discuss, and we exchange. And we also kind of try to build, well, the space of empathy, let's say. So, and then when it became cold, we said, okay, it's too cold to meet up under the tree, so we have to come up with something else. And we said, what can we do? We said, okay, let's do care walk. So care walk, we walked in public spaces. And again, we discussed future projects, past projects, possible projects, how to help each other, how to support each other. Because for many artists, it was very difficult. I mean, a lot of artists were depressed, you know, during this kind of confinement. So, and they were very happy just to go out to see that something is going on, that there's some curators still interested in their work, you know. So you see there are many kind of interdependencies coming together. So and this is how we try to manage the safety, security, and care, because of course we didn't want to put people in danger. So we had to follow the rules to meet the specific circumstances, specific places, mask, and so on. But on the other hand, not overemphasizing it and not sort of dramatizing the situation. So it was very important for us to show that things are still possible and we're there for them. So somehow, yeah.
I like this description, Elena, of I'm understanding a little bit as methodologies of trust and commitment, no? How to trust a situation and ourselves anew in a way, or in a different set of conditions. And yeah,
right.
Yeah, I really like those practical terms, no? And what you said on your initial talk of act, whatever the circumstances, is acting.
It's a beautiful quote. I should send it, I think, to everybody. It's really beautiful. It was released. Eliseo McCallum, he's a researcher, writer, scholar in Geneva. I think he teaches in Geneva. And somehow we came across this quote in the very beginning. And it was really straight to the point, go straight to the point, you know, during all this kind of like the first sort of dramatization of the crisis. And as a crisis, there has never been a crisis before, you know. So and he was very, very sharp, and of course he was also pointing to the situation that the crisis reaches Europe, and a lot of other places, you know, have been in crisis way before, and more dangerous types of situations and crisis and so on. So he speaks about that, but we took out this specific quote.
I really like, Elena, well, actually everyone talking about maybe reconfiguring slightly the idea of security with the idea and the practice of support, and not just to swap the words, but I mean, security is about holding something down, and it also etymologically is to be free from care. And support, I'm thinking about, Yolande, your presentation too, is it's about holding something or providing some kind of infrastructure, whether it's the ground, in order to, I think, to allow something to kind of flourish. And the fact that security is about holding down and pressing down, which, like oppression, I think also means holding and pressing something down. It's, I think, you know, in terms of security and safety and care, those terms can all be reconfigured, I think, in the broader framework of support, what it means to draw something out to enable someone or something to flourish. And to also go back to what you were saying, Elena, the fact that I think support can only come through a level of intimacy and connection and commitment, to draw on the word that you said, Rosario, which, you know, you can support, or you could support someone or something logistically just by, you know, quickly doing something, but actually it's really about staying with something and someone over a period of time, and always thinking about what those mechanisms and forms of support can be. And I think, Yolande, you used this kind of phrase of rising up, and I wanted to ask you all what it means to. So Yolande, you said about making something present doesn't, I think you were also quoting, doesn't necessarily mean that you're dismantling systems of oppression or prejudice. And then Rosario, you also talked about what it meant to make something visible or make certain structures visible. And I just wanted to hear from all of you one, how do you make something present and something visible without endangering those people or processes, particularly if they're quite vulnerable? So how do you do it with care? And is it always
vulnerability as well, making that fragility, sharing that fragility, let's say. But I think for that, again, we go back to this idea of acknowledging this interdependence and then mutual support and trust and all these words or that we have been sharing throughout the talk. It was really nice how these different concepts are kind of connected. But what I wanted to say is that for us, for example, at the floating, is like we need to understand the different places that we are coming from. We are 46 members and everyone is different. So the acknowledgement of different is very important. And the other thing that we try to do is make let's say that everybody can share their own where they're coming from and where they are at the moment, and that we can share different needs, let's say, and it's not an easy task. This is what I always say, like when you're working with a group of human beings and we're all different, it's always a lot of it requires a lot of time. That's what I'm trying to say, to open up a space where everybody's feeling safe to come forward with difference and then to negotiate. And I think that's the level of complexity, when in the interpersonal. So I don't know how you do it, Yolande, in a big institution, because there the frameworks or let's say the structures are much more robust, and the protocols have been established years ago, centuries ago. I don't know, and they are. What in a small organization like ours, what we can do is all the time react quite quickly in a way, because we don't have all those established protocols, and we are a little bit more plastic in a way that if it doesn't work 6 months later, we can change the structure of the team, or at least we can talk about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rosario. I mean, I think that's partially why I was interested in learning from Elena, this relation back to the larger institution, if that's at stake, if that is the desire. And thanks for the question, Yates. Nice to see you again too. Nice to hear you. I think the quote that you were pointing to is Karen Salt's quote, which I carry with me too, like making something present does not transform the institution around it. I think particularly now when there's so much of an effort to make things present, present in an act of inclusion, in an act of being accessible to, in an act of insertion, right? And it's precisely kind of dynamic that I'm also implicated in, which was what I was trying to point to in including or inserting Ana Mendieta in a collection, in a house, as you say, Rosario, that's really old. When I was 84 years old, so there's a history, there in terms of it's a modern and it's a modern and contemporary art museum that you all can imagine how those are constructed, right? So it's an incomplete house, and I think for me, oftentimes museums are judged, their ethical kind of performances judged with in how they program. And what I've come to learn since I've joined the team is that if the proof is in the pudding is not the programming, actually. Institutions, particularly museums, can absolve themselves quite quickly that way. The pudding rather, is the collection. So that's why I share like these statistics, not so much to be, I know there's a shock tactic, more to point out the standard and the norm across the board. I don't have the statistics at hand, but I can imagine this is how actually museums in this part of the world look like across the board. And why, and I'm getting to answer your question, Yates, I hope. Why I'm also interested in Mendieta and what I was describing before is her misbehavior. I think there's something happening in her work too, where, because part of your question was, does she in this case need to be protected? I'm learning that in part of her process, her kind of her acts in returning to the earth, her rituals, if you will, there's something a bit untouchable there. If you start to study her work, the films and the photographs are not so much the work themselves, they capture a process. Again, we've been talking a lot about process and practice. And so when a museum in this instance acquires or is custodian of a picture, it's but an element. And I think actually she's resisting that kind of capture. And I'm interested in practices that do that, because I also learn from them in terms of how to exist in this like in this rubric, right, or in this institutional structure.
I think I can answer your question and also elaborate a little bit on like, let's say, difficulties of institution to instrumentalize Mendieta at the same time. So maybe through telling a story, Yolande, because what I do, shall we kind of try to bring this artist to the big institutions? Yeah, you were speaking about inclusion, insertion, and a French term is integration. The French term is really very violent in a sense. So it's discussed and debated a lot in the art circles, also in smaller institutions, and so in a sense, yes, there's some. I think big institutions need to look at these artists and help these artists, and I also think that they need these artists more than these artists need them, because precisely they will question their own ideas about art history, institutions, and so on and so forth. So, and this is why at some point I realized that, and I was very surprised that this very small, tiny, concrete initiative suddenly was bringing us to these fundamental questions. For example, so, and this is my story, one of the members of the initiative comes from Afghanistan. So when I met him, he was asylum seeker in France. So his official status, administrative social status in a foreign country, which is France, was asylum seeker. And he presented himself as designer. I didn't see much of his work, but also he never went to any kind of art school. He wanted to do something. He actually needed to do something. What he was producing is jewelry. So, and this is basically what I'm wearing. So it's jewelry. And he tried to get to some sort of art residency in an institution, and the institution told him jewelry is not art. So you can't be you can't be a member. We can't accept you. So right. And then we said to ourselves, it's just one of many examples of how we work, and what the initiative produces. And it's being also produced with a lot of joy. So we are really pleasure activists because it's a lot of fun. So Ismail, who was waiting for his papers, who has spent 6 years, waiting, like being asylum seeker, traveling from Germany, finally he found some kind of little place where he could be happy. He could find some material. He could find like-minded people, and this place told him, no, you're not an artist, and what you produce is no art. So we said, okay, great. So how can we prove that Ismail's jewelry is art? So how can we prove that? And we decided to organize a photo shoot. So one of our members is an artist-run space. And this artist-run space is located in Montmartre, but really at the same spot as Picasso's Bateau Lavoir. It's just around the corner. So, but this is the parenthesis. So, and we said, okay, great. We exhibit Ismail in this space, and then we organize a photo shoot where artists, us, members of the initiative, will wear his work, and then we declare that his work is portable sculpture. So then he has a proof which can be presented to institutions. Whatever institutions require some kind of proof of him being an artist. And this is where our use value kicks in, in Tania Bruguera's sense or many other senses, in the interventionist sense. So he has a proof, and we as initiative have produced this proof to facilitate his communication with art institutions, because actually the inertia is really huge of the judgment, the institutional judgment of who belongs to the small circle of art and who doesn't. So we have been also doing this kind of things for people who are who have an art practice, but who are really very, very far from being acknowledged as an artist by institutions. So it's just I'm not exactly answering, but it's I think I can't have like one straight line of answer on this question. It's quite complex, but I think institutions have to do more work.
In French, is there a distinction between inclusion and integration in terms of equality? Do they make that distinction?
It is a very long and complicated debate. Integration is a word, intégration, which is a social really word, and it is mainly used, or it was used, because now it is used less and less, for, let's say, newcomers, for immigrants who come to France and who are supposed to integrate, because the French system is very different from the British system. So there are no communities, so they're not allowed by law. And everyone who kind of comes to the country is supposed to integrate, whatever it means, and it means a lot. Learning the language, being, let's say, pretty much neutrally invisible in your appearance, having a French education, and so on and so forth. There are many, many things. So, and since it has been such a heated and long debate, I don't want to summarize it. I don't want to be reductive now. So it's all I can say.
I feel it's important to say, in case it's not clear, I'm not so much interested in the integration, the insertion, or the inclusion of Ana Mendieta in the collection. No. I'm interested in what it does once we lean into her work and her practice, because it actually starts to very much like topple the requirements or the prescriptions of the institution. She's moving on her own terrain. And I would agree with you, Elena. The institution needs her much more than vice versa. The game is the other way around. So her domestication into even an art historical discourse, which is what Lippert talks about. If you think about how she's been erased in the land art movement, is not so interesting to me. It's more actually leaning into her practice and learning from that and have that be the guide, which is an interesting tension when we think about what it means to enter a collection and to be historicized, and the mechanisms that we use to historicize actually are intention with what her work and her practice.
Yeah, definitely. Mechanisms we use to historicize is exactly that. But also, it is nice what you have said. Well, it is nice. It's a fact. You make us remember this body art, female body art versus earth art, male earth art. It's really telling, and it says it all. You know, like put side by side like that. It's really good. Yeah.
Hey, I wanted to, because you all are in a way speaking different ways about doing versus like describing, or the universalization versus situatedness or specificness or embodiment, and how somehow this complexity which is around like trying to be in the situation, or not to speak about institutions in general or specific situation. I also think about it many times. It feels it's also very uncertain or precarious, or somehow energy sucking work for a curator, or for a person who tries to care or do things in caring ways or ethical ways. So I'm interested. Yates, you were speaking a little bit about this hope in your talk, in the reading. So I'm also interested about like how do you see this kind of I don't know, was it called self-care, or like this idea of like just to handle the work, or just to handle the thing, what you're doing. It would be really interesting to hear about this. I don't know. I'm not asking you like how do you relax or something like that, but or maybe this could be something also to talk about, but in relationship to this question.
I think one of the things I was trying to say in that text that I wrote, and it's nice to hear Elena, Yolande, and Rosario kind of echo it in terms of these ideas of pleasure and joy. I think often we think of care as like baseline energy sucking and depressing, and you know it is, you know, I think in the system that we're in, it hasn't been valued. It is actually systemically undervalued. My brother is a frontline nurse, and he's very, very tired after a year and a half of basically doing night shifts. At the same time, I think if we just shifted slightly, and also to go off on what Yolande, you were saying, to like lean in and listen to the artists and people that we admire. And I think if we did that more, especially in liberation movements, we would see how much incredible joy and pleasure and curiosity there is amongst, you know, all of us. I think all of us do want to have a want to build connections with other people and with our environment, and that sense of liberation is actually just something very creative and generative and generous. And so I think in that sense, if maybe that's the little bit of hope that we can hold on to, we hold on to on our minds, that how whether it's access work or care work, it can always be configured by profound intimacy. At the same time, I think, we all have worked or do work in institutions which, for a variety of reasons, aren't set up for, or at worst are actively against supporting that kind of work in those institutions and spaces. And that can be tiring. That's the kind of exhausting part of resistance, when you feel that nothing is being generated, it's just being depleted. But something that I really hold on to is Heide, who's an artist who gave a talk as part of this program I did last year, and they have a piece called Scarcity, where they just repeat that there is time, there are resources, there is money. And I think so often we especially in the art world, we repeat, and this isn't to say that it isn't exhausting and tiring, there aren't resources, because Jesus, I think we all know, but I think we get into the habit of saying everything's exhausting, there is no money, and that's often true. But I think often actually we can just all make the time and make the space to shift it. I mean, it's going to take time. Maybe that's the question of commitment. So I don't know, it's complicated. So the kind of cop-out answer is saying it's complicated, but I think I would like to center joy and pleasure, like I think Yolande, Rosario, Elena, and I know Jussi and Yvonne, you do too, and to kind of hold on to that.
I agree. I think we need to hold the space also for joyfulness and togetherness, but this is a shift in our routines and habits, and they take time. And I think the challenging issue is for me, it's like also when we are in this mode of the production mode, of delivering certain amount of things that we need to deliver, is to stop and question, do we actually need to do this? Is this necessary?
Yeah.
Like, why am I doing a festival with 40 events? It maybe is a better festival if I do 25. And and I think this, for me, the pandemic was a moment where, and I think it's kind of a privileged position not to be able to say, oh, we actually really slowed down, and now we're doing things slower because there was no other option. And I think we need to hold to that slowness. And I think this is what, Elena, you were saying, like, it's not going back to normal, right? It's not that what we're hoping for. And I think in this text I quote Nataša. It's one of the suggested readings. She wrote a text in Influx a few years ago she called for slow institutions, which is a very beautiful text also. And I think introducing these qualities of softness, slowness, vulnerability, fragility, I think that's quite challenging but it can be done in a joyful way, I think.
Sometimes we're surprised that it actually works, that it still works, because we haven't raised any money or institutional support yet. But since everybody feels that it is a kind of labor of love, it continues to exist, and people love it. So they like to come, we like to exchange. And then this project, they just simply generate and they grow somehow. They just grow. And we are definitely committed to the slow research because, of course, a kind of initial idea, our first, let's say, impulse was, okay, let's do a project maybe when we started to think about what can we do, back then in 2020. But then we said, no, project is definitely not enough. It's a different temporality. Project is a project. What kind of project is it? So, well, unless you can define a project as a, I don't know, 5 years project or 10 years project. But then we said we take project, the word, the meaning of it, just like entirely out of consideration. And we start something. And this is why initiative is not an accident. Really, initiative has a beginning, but no end. So this is what we said to ourselves. Let's call it initiative because then it is compatible with the slow temporality in a sense. So, yes, and relationships are slow if it is a really interesting, valuable for you relationship or intimate relationship. They're slow, and care is slow. Because rapid care is a kind of a fast care, is a contradiction in terms. Well, intensive care, when we know what it is when you're already dying, so it's not really what we value as humans and what we have or we seek for as care in our daily lives. So care is slow.
Thank you. I think we need to take a break now for 5 minutes, and after the break, it would be nice to hear from the audience some questions, or to have it in the chat, please. And if not, we can continue the conversation for until 6:30 or something like that. 6:30 Finnish time. Yes.
There's a nice flow on the go, but we like to maintain this practice of breaks.
Yeah.
So, yes, but just 5 minutes.
Yeah, let's start again in 8+6, 8+5, probably for many of you. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it seems we don't have very many questions coming up or chats, and but maybe we'll just ask out loud just now if anybody wants to bring anything to the conversation, any comments or thoughts or questions. Is it so that people can turn on their own cameras? And no, so maybe you have to raise your hand function.
Or just chat.
Or chat in the box, and we can turn on your sound and your video. But maybe in the meantime, we could continue here together.
Yates, are we actually? Are you with us now? Thank you. We are.
Yes.
Hello.
Nice. I've been really enjoying listening to these kind of crossings and intersections of your works and your kind of, I guess, your thoughts on these, but also the ways in which you're working together, not together, but together apart or something. Because maybe we were interested in inviting you all because you come from the kind of different backgrounds, different institutions, different ways of working, different fields as well. But it's very interesting to have this kind of common vocabulary also emerge, and these similar questions coming up, but in different ways. So yes, this is something that maybe we have mentioned a little bit, is that there's I guess these kind of intersections also in security and safety and care in terms of vocabularies, and so it was really interesting, Yates, listening to you pick these apart. Actually, in our initial invitation to you, I had actually constructed like a kind of a list of definitions because I found it amazing to see these laid out and these kind of crossings, but also these real, I guess, contrasts between the two. And yeah, I guess this kind of tension of things is something that I'm always interested in, and yeah, I was kind of interested in, Yolande, you talk about this as well, and this double bind. So yeah.
Oh, go ahead, yeah. Oh, Elena, did you want to say something? Oh no, sorry. I was just gonna. Oh, sorry. The perils of Zoom. I was just wanted to pick up on that about, I mean, the etymologies of the words. I mean, I tend to go to them, or at least English words, because it gives you a sense of on where it's come from, but also how it's been used or entered into everyday speech. And it is interesting that security is related to care, but the idea of being carefree. And I thought earlier, Jussi, your question about, I mean, at least in our society, the idea of being carefree is something that we probably aspire to. And if you have dependents or like children, for example, you would like them to live a relatively carefree existence. But I think that maybe that's an issue in our approach to care, that we actually aspire to wanting to live free of care, and actually care can, maybe we should shift it a bit and not actually reach towards wanting to live full of care. And as everyone has said, that living with care can be very creative, because I think when you live with care and you are careful, you tend to note more and take more in, and ultimately that level of curiosity and openness is, I think, not to sound sentimental about it, but it's a kind of key part of what it is to be alive. And I think working with artists, to go back to what Yolande is saying, is that I think they show, that's what's so nourishing about working with artists, but also lots of other people. It doesn't have to just be artists, but they have a level of care and openness to themselves, to the world around them, to materials that I think can give us a kind of level of hope. So in that sense, security is a kind of slightly sad word, that and also it's obviously historically, and it's a very loaded word, as you've pointed out.
Because Yates actually, we had a brief conversation before this, and Yates asked this question of why security, and where did security come from? And I had this, I admitted that I kind of had this worry about working with, like in discourse and not in practice. Like, how can we approach working with such loaded and difficult issues in a public programme, that often we really try to also bring into the practice of the institution, but as you say, this can be like a complex and kind of slower model of doing things as well.
I should hasten to add, I don't think we should get rid of the word security. I also think, like, often, I mean, we're speaking from positions of, relative privilege, and security is like an extremely important thing for so many people. I mean, and as you say, Yvonne, it's a complex term. It's like, in the same way that we have problems with the terms of like efficiency, speed. But I mean, as you pointed out, just because he's close to home and I love him, but my brother, for him working in care work, sometimes efficiency and speed is absolutely integral. So it's not necessarily ipso facto bad, but it is interesting, because it in some ways the word security can kind of leave a bit of a sour taste. I don't know what everyone else thinks about that word, or how they responded to it, or what their anxieties were, or about responding to
and I'll just say it maybe quickly, because we've been a lot of our thinking and work on security is really linked to this, the way that security and insecurity are deeply connected and inform one another. So this relationship between these two things has kind of been a really central way in which we've been approaching working with these matters.
Yeah, maybe, and also a little bit say what been kind of personally for me interesting, that in this kind of situation of COVID or crisis, a lot of these discourses around care and safety in the curatorial artistic scene has somehow emerged. They've been there already a lot. I'm not saying that wouldn't be existing or like existing at all. They've been in the like very, maybe in the marginal practices of but then now they've been somehow gained this visibility in the institutional setting, as maybe Rosario also pointed out in the beginning. And then this is somehow interesting, or somehow kind of for a question for me maybe is like, why this happened, like why we are not actually speaking about security and why we are speaking about safety and care. And are we just giving this security, like in this the moment of crisis, that somehow again for maybe right-wing politics, or even like in that's how it shows in the many institutions, that the security somehow is about objects or infrastructures, or even like architecture or space itself, like some kind of material like something where we are, but not the communities itself, or not the people who are using or could use it, or could be around communities around it. So and then when we are speaking about those communities and people, we are very much speaking about care and this like self-care and this like so-called personal thing or something like that. So I think that was the question to like somehow I'm trying to understand or unpack through the program, and also the exhibitions which are part of the program. But the maybe there's no answer in itself, but it's a kind of exploration of this questions, or this doubts or challenges in a way.
And I guess this, like I was saying earlier, this idea of addressing like the structural and the body and the relationship, it is a scale, but it's also about how these things are deeply interconnected and touch one another. You know, the ways in which systems of power and hierarchies and structures that we explore through hospitality in this program really affect people in a very intimate and embodied way. I think this is the thing that we're just trying to tease out a little bit more and understand ourselves, like how this is happening and in what ways. So yeah. But sorry, I think maybe we also maybe skipped Yolande at one point there. Were you wanting to Rosario?
No, Elena has her hand up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've totally missed that. I'm using a different computer. Elena, your sound's not on.
We lost you.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
So that was headphones. Coming back to this the terms, you know, we use. I wanted to comment on Yates' elaboration of carefree. I found it very interesting because, of course, it is English language. So, because in French, it is not carefree, it is sans souci. So it is without concern. And it is the same in German. So in German, it is sorgless, right? So, and it is the same in Russian. Actually, English is an exception.
It's interesting. There is that when you say sans-ci, because I was just there's that palace near
Berlin, right?
Near Berlin, which, and it does, you do think of carefree as and being or sans souci as like being like deeply related to.
English, there's a meaning which is not present in these other three languages. I'm actually, because I thought about it, it's the same in Russian, which is surprising because Russian is it's not from the same family. But I also wanted to say that since we speak French, so we are bilingual in the initiative. So we started to translate care into French. And it is not obvious at all because it is such a term which covers a huge ground, actually. So in French, you need several words kind of overlapping to get to create, or kind of like to gather all the meanings which exist in the English term care.
I would like to share with you another link, because we, with Soft Agency, we just been working around topics of care and repair and healing. And we have been commissioned for the Copenhagen Architecture Festival a few weeks ago. And we proposed to curate a section of their landscape. They are doing a festival that is called Landscapes of Care. We proposed, one of the contributions to this journal is a landscape of terms. And we're proposing to expand the lexicon, noting also that the word care is being used quite freely as well for many different things. We ended up doing a very kind of playful poster that you can download, and I'm going to share it in the chat. And it's basically a collection of different quotes that bring also concepts like hospitality or support structure from Céline Condorelli, or mutual aid, and a few others like relationality and softness and so on. And I really need to go, so I just wanted to, I'm sorry I have to be at 6 somewhere else. And I wanted to say goodbye with this little gift, and I enjoyed speaking with all of you, and I hope we cross paths at some point in some place.
Yes, thank you so much for joining, Rosario, and for all your contributions. And we have this desire in the programme to all kind of continue relationships with people over time, and so it was nice to have you, and we hope that there'll be future opportunity to connect in the future.
Yes, Kitty, I really had a question for you to elaborate on your 6th notion on bureaucratic. I wondered,
the joyful administration.
Yes.
Yeah, it's on the poster. It was basically a also an attitude, let's say, to react to all the amount of bureaucratic work that I found myself doing in these cultural and pedagogical projects, independent projects, or working with institutions, taking care, and also seeing this divide between the academic, the artist, the creative worker, and then the admin people, and this fracture in the institutions placed in different buildings when it comes to universities, and suffering the lack of understanding between us, the different lexicon, employment of language, and seeing that divide made me like, why, if we're like working in community, right? And yeah, it required a lot of joy, or joyful attitude to try to bridge those worlds, as I was seeing myself bouncing between them. And I think this happens to all of us, yeah, cultural workers. Yeah.
And also congratulations on the program, Rosario. It looks really amazing. Yeah, we'll post a link to that in the chat box as well. Thanks for making the time to join us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And maybe we'll just kind of round up as well, anyhow, unless people have some pressing questions that they wanted to pose that don't, or something they feel just wasn't quite addressed that needs we have this thing in our program that we actually, I guess our kind of general approach is that we're building things and building upon things all the time and trying to create some continuity. So we quite often return to what we might have overlooked previously, and also this is where, like for example, security comes up in relation to what we were working with last year, which was focusing on access and accessibility, and previous to that, questions of knowledge and ways of knowing, so that there's some kind of thread being woven between these things. But yes, thank you all once again for joining us today. Maybe we can just plug some future things that we have coming up in our program. Saturday, perhaps?
Yes, yes. Thanks for my behalf to also Yolande, Yates, and Elena. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so the program continues in this week. Tomorrow, maybe one you can mention about it. It's in Helsinki physically, but still it's good to mention.
Yes, I'm very excited about it. Specifically, what we were talking about, this kind of need for being situated and doing things together, finding ways of being together safely and in a kind of intimate ways. So we have a program that takes place in Helsinki Central Park tomorrow, kind of series of artworks being presented in collaboration with the Finnish Cultural Institute, and it's called Experiments in Togetherness, Herding in Helsinki Central Park. So yes, wish you could all be there with us. That would be nice. And then on Saturday, we have a workshop in the morning, a kind of reflective process on the program and some of the questions that's been coming up in relation to different public events and also different contributors over the last year actually as well. And then followed by that, we have a talk.
Yeah, we have a talk by Ail Weisman from Forensic Architecture, which opens up their practice and kind of question related to security and human rights and human rights violations. Yeah, their work is also shown by Architecture Museum currently in Finland, who we are collaborating with, and also in the exhibition what we did with the Vantaa Art Museum, which opened yesterday. So that is pretty much what is happening still in Helsinki and online. Yeah, thanks. Hopefully you can join to those two.
Yes. Thanks once again, everyone, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.